Right now, millions of people are walking away from everything they've built. High-paying careers, long-term relationships, social circles they've spent decades cultivating. To the outside world, it looks exactly like self-destruction. But Carl Jung saw this coming over 70 years ago. He called it the inevitable crisis of the awakened soul, and he believed it wasn't a collapse, but humanity's most important evolution. Today, I'll reveal the 5 psychological reasons Jung identified for why awakened people must leave society, the shadow work that makes staying impossible, and the profound world-changing purpose he saw in this mass exodus. What you're about to discover might finally explain that unbearable restlessness you've been feeling. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. When you awaken spiritually, you don't just see through society's illusions. Your entire nervous system begins rejecting them. It's not a choice anymore. It becomes a biological imperative. Your body literally cannot tolerate what it once accepted. And Jung believed this wasn't a bug in human psychology. It was a feature designed to push humanity toward its next evolutionary leap. This isn't a small shift. It's a total systemic reboot. The crisis begins with the disintegration of the persona. Most people don't realize they're wearing a mask until it starts cracking. This mask, what Jung termed the persona, is every role you've learned to play. The professional you, the social you, the family you. It's not necessarily fake, it's adaptive. It helped you survive and fit in. But here's what happens during spiritual awakening. You start seeing the mask as separate from your true self. Suddenly, you're watching yourself perform in meetings, pretend to care about small talk, and fake enthusiasm for things that feel hollow. It's like becoming conscious during a dream and realizing you've been sleepwalking your entire life. This realization is both liberating and terrifying. Jung documented case after case of highly successful individuals who reached this point and simply couldn't continue. One patient, a prominent banker, confessed to Jung, "I sit in board meetings discussing millions, and all I can think is, we're all pretending this matters. We're all acting out roles in a play nobody wants to be in, but everyone's too afraid to leave the stage." This isn't depression, it's clarity. And once you see the performance, you can't unsee it. The illusion is shattered forever. But it gets more intense. Because when your false self starts dying, society doesn't celebrate your authenticity. It punishes it. Co-workers sense you're not playing along anymore. Family members feel threatened by your refusal to maintain old, comfortable dynamics. Friends drift away because your presence, your newfound transparency, reminds them they're wearing masks too. Your sudden truth acts as a mirror that the collective is not ready to look into. Jung was brutally honest about the price. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. This ownership of self, what Jung called individuation, requires leaving the spaces where your false self is demanded. You literally cannot complete your psychological evolution while performing your old role. It's a physiological and spiritual impossibility. It's not about judgment or superiority. It's about fundamental incompatibility. An awakened consciousness trying to operate through a false persona is like trying to run complex new software on outdated hardware. The system crashes. This crash, this necessary self-destruction of the ego, leads directly to the next difficult transformation. True awakening requires descending into your shadow, all the parts of yourself a society taught you to hide, deny, and repress. This journey into your own darkness is non-negotiable. Here's the core problem. Modern society is built on shadow projection. We externalize our darkness onto others. Other political parties, other nations, other races. This projection is what maintains social cohesion. Everyone agrees who the bad guys are, and this collective agreement creates tribal belonging and security. But when you start integrating your shadow, something terrifying and isolating happens. You can't project anymore. You see your own capacity for everything you judge in others, your own greed when you condemn billionaires, your own hidden authoritarianism when you fight fiercely against control, your own unconsciousness when you harshly judge the sleeping masses. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But here's the profound consequence for your social life. When you stop projecting, you become deeply disturbing to those who still desperately need their projections. You stop feeding their moral superiority complex. You refuse to participate in their binary, us vs them worldview. For example, during spiritual awakening, many people recognize their own narcissistic shadows, the parts that crave specialness, superiority, or even enlightenment itself as an ego achievement. When you own this, instead of projecting it onto false gurus or unconscious people, you stop playing the game of who's more evolved. Your refusal to engage in the subtle hierarchy makes you dangerous to spiritual communities and social groups alike. You can't condemn the unconscious masses because you see your own unconsciousness clearly. You can't rage against the system because you recognize your own participation and complicity in it. You can't even fully blame those who hurt you because you see how you've hurt others in similar subtle ways. This isn't about excusing harmful behavior. It's about recognizing what Jung called the collective shadow. We're all participating in the darkness we claim to oppose. And once you see this, you can't participate in society's projection games anymore. Society needs its scapegoats, its villains, its others to define itself against. When you withdraw your projections, you withdraw the emotional energy that maintains these social structures. You become psychologically unusable to the collective, and the collective, sensing this internal secession, begins to push you out. The next reason is that awakened consciousness doesn't experience time the way society demands. Jung called this the reality of the psyche, the fact that psychological time is circular, synchronistic, and meaningful in ways that absolutely defy clock time. Think about how society functions. Schedules, deadlines, 5-year plans, retirement savings. Everything is built on linear time, the assumption that life moves predictably from point A to point B, that progress means constantly moving forward, that success can be measured in accumulated years of achievement. But here's what happens in awakening. You start experiencing what Jung called synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that suggest reality is more like a fluid web than a rigid line. Past, present, and future start bleeding into each other. You have dreams that accurately predict events. You think of someone intensely and they call immediately. You see patterns and symbols that seem to be speaking directly to your unconscious. Jung wasn't being mystical here. He was observing that consciousness, when it expands, begins operating according to what he called a causal orderedness, an organizing principle beyond simple cause and effect. This is why awakened people often seem profoundly out of sync with society. They literally are. They're operating on psychological time while society demands mechanical time. One of Jung's patients, a highly successful engineer, described it perfectly. "I sit in planning meetings where we map out the next quarter, and I want to laugh, not from arrogance, but from sheer absurdity. I'm experiencing time as this flowing, living thing where past traumas are more real than tomorrow's deadline, where a dream feels more significant than a business contract. A moment of presence contains more value than a year of productivity." You can't explain this profound temporal shift to someone living strictly in linear time. How do you tell your boss you can't commit to the 5-year plan because you're experiencing temporal dissolution? How do you explain that scheduling feels like violence to your psyche when you're learning to follow what Jung called the natural, organic rhythm of the individuation process? This temporal incompatibility becomes unbearable. You're asked to show up at 9 a.m. when your soul is still processing a revelatory dream. You're expected to move on from grief when psychological time has you still in the depths of loss. You're pressured to plan your future when you're being urgently called to stay present to what is dying right now. Society's time is mechanical. The self's time is organic. And once you've shifted to organic time, mechanical time feels like a suffocating prison. If you're recognizing these patterns, your false self dying, unable to project shadows, feeling profoundly out of sync with mechanical time, you're not going crazy. You're going sane in an insane world. The leaving isn't giving up. It's growing up into who you truly are. The fourth reason is the burden of the collective unconscious. Jung understood that after integrating your own shadow, you become painfully aware of the collective unconscious surrounding you, creating an almost unbearable psychological burden that necessitates isolation. Imagine suddenly being able to see everyone's shadows, not through judgment, but through direct perception. You walk into a room and feel the unprocessed grief 3 generations deep, the ancestral wounds haunting the space. You sit in a meeting and sense the childhood traumas driving every power play, every manipulation. You watch the news and see not random current events, but ancient patterns repeating, what Jung called archetypal possessions playing out on a mass scale. Jung wrote, "The meeting with one's self is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well." But here's the crucial point. After you've gone through that narrow door, you realize almost everyone around you is still avoiding it. This isn't about feeling superior. It's about crippling energetic overwhelm. When you've developed what Jung called psychological consciousness, you become a kind of emotional lightning rod for the unconscious material around you. Other people's repressed emotions, denied shadows, and unintegrated traumas start powerfully constellating around your awareness. One of Jung's female patients described it hauntingly. "I don't just feel others' emotions. I feel what they refuse to feel. I carry not just my own shadow, but the shadows of everyone who won't carry theirs." It's like being awake in a world of sleepwalkers and absorbing all the dreams they won't remember. This is why awakened people often develop chronic illness, inexplicable anxiety, or profound exhaustion that no doctor can fully explain. They're not just processing their own psychological material, they're involuntarily processing the collective unconscious of their environment. Jung called this participation mystique, a psychological state where boundaries dissolve and you carry what isn't yours. Society doesn't just fail to recognize this burden, it actively exploits it. Awakened individuals become unofficial, unpaid therapists for everyone around them. Energy vampires seek them out instinctively. Narcissists target them because they sense someone who sees deeply and might offer the unconditional acceptance they crave. Unconscious family systems designate them as the identified patient, the one who carries the symptoms of the entire system's dysfunction. And here's the essential truth Jung revealed. You cannot heal or integrate at the level of consciousness while surrounded by those committed to unconsciousness. It's the psychological equivalent of trying to get sober in a bar. The environment itself maintains the disease. This is why isolation isn't antisocial for awakened beings. It's psychologically necessary. What looks like withdrawal is actually what Jung called the transcendent function, creating the sacred space for a new level of consciousness to emerge that can bridge the opposites and birth something genuinely new. The fifth and final reason is perhaps the most profound of all, the non-negotiable agenda of the self. The self is not the ego, not the persona, but an organizing center of the whole psyche that knows your true purpose. And here's the terrifying truth. The self's agenda has nothing to do with society's agenda. Society wants you productive, compliant, consuming. The self wants you whole, authentic, individuated. Society values external achievement. The self values internal integration. Society measures success by accumulation. The self measures it by how much illusion you've shed. Jung observed that when people reach a certain level of awakening, they start receiving what he called demands from the self. Powerful internal directives that often contradict everything that seems logical or safe. Leave the marriage that looks perfect but feels dead. Quit the job that pays well but kills your soul. Move to a place that makes no sense but calls to your depths. These aren't whims or midlife crises. They're what Jung called the self-regulating function of the psyche, your deepest wisdom-correcting course, often dramatically. The self doesn't care about your comfort. It cares about your completion. This calling often requires betraying everyone else's expectations. Your parents' dreams for you, your partner's need for security, your own ego's attachment to identity and status. Jung was blunt about this. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege requires what feels like betrayal to everyone who needed you to stay who you were. One of Jung's most profound case studies involved a successful doctor who kept having dreams of living in a simple cabin in the mountains writing poetry. For years, he dismissed these dreams as escapist fantasy, but they intensified, became demanding, and turned into physical symptoms, chest pains that had no medical cause, anxiety that no medication could touch. Finally, at 52, he left everything. His colleagues called it a breakdown. His family staged interventions. But Jung understood this wasn't pathology. It was the self demanding its true life. The man chose living as a failed poet over dying as a successful doctor. This is the ultimate reason awakened people leave society. They're called to a life that society cannot understand, validate, or support. It is about accepting a mission that requires leaving the world's terms. Jung saw this happening on a mass scale, predicting that as humanity approached the spiritual problem of modern man, more individuals would be called to leave collective life to pioneer new ways of being. Not as escapism, but as evolution, a psychological necessity. The self's call is non-negotiable. You can delay it, medicate it, or rationalize it away. But Jung observed that it only gets louder, more insistent, and more creative in its disruption of your false life, orchestrating crises to free you. But here's what most people miss about Jung's vision. He didn't see this exodus as the end. He saw it as the beginning, the return of the transformed. Awakened individuals don't leave society to escape it, but to transform at a depth impossible while embedded in collective unconsciousness. It's like a caterpillar entering the chrysalis. The dissolution is metamorphosis. You cannot become a butterfly while other caterpillars are telling you to stay in formation. Those who honor the leaving and complete their individuation in solitude eventually develop the transcendent function, an ability to bridge the conscious and unconscious, the individual and collective. They don't return to society as it was. They return as what Jung called carriers of consciousness, people whose very presence catalyzes awakening in others, not through preaching or teaching, but through embodiment. They've integrated their shadows so deeply that they don't trigger others' projections. They've transcended linear time so completely that they bring presence to every interaction. They've answered the self's call so fully that they inspire others to hear their own. Jung saw this as humanity's evolutionary strategy. Not everyone awakens at once. That would be collective chaos. Instead, individuals are called out, transformed, and return to seed new consciousness, making it easier for the next wave. What seems like societal breakdown is actually breakthrough in slow motion. Here's the ultimate paradox Jung identified. You can only truly serve society by leaving it. You can only heal the collective by separating from it. You can only bring light by first descending into your own darkness alone. This is psychological law. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot lead where you haven't been. The leaving is preparation for a different kind of return. The mass exodus isn't social collapse, it's social evolution. Each person who leaves to answer their self's calling weakens the old structure and strengthens what's being born. So here's what Jung wants you to understand. If you're feeling the unbearable pressure to leave your career, your relationship, your entire way of life, you're not failing. You're being called. The discomfort isn't weakness. It's growth trying to happen. The isolation isn't punishment. It's preparation. Your false self needs to die. Your shadows need integration, and society's agenda needs to be abandoned for your self's purpose to be revealed. The 5 transformations are simultaneous, all weaving together into one movement. Individuation, the becoming of who you truly are. Jung never promised it would be easy, but he promised it would be real. And in a world of illusions, reality is the ultimate revolution. If you're being called to leave, you're not alone. You're part of what Jung saw as humanity's most important transformation. Trust the leaving, trust the process, trust yourself.